The storm raged with an intensity that seemed to swallow the world whole. The snow fell in relentless sheets, burying rooftops, silencing streets, and pressing its icy weight on every soul caught within its grasp. It was the kind of storm people would talk about for years to come, the blizzard of '98, they'd call it in town later, but on that night, for the few souls trapped in it, there was no thought of history, only survival. In her small wooden home on the outskirts of town, Martha Johnson rocked slowly in her chair, her woolen blanket tucked over her frail knees. At 72, she was accustomed to long winters, but this one cut sharper than most. The wind seemed to moan through the cracks in her windows, slipping cold fingers into the room despite the fire crackling in her stove. She leaned forward, rubbing her hands together, staring into the flames. Her house was quiet, too quiet. It had been years since she'd shared a winter storm with anyone else. Once, her husband William would have sat across from her, sipping tea and humming as he whittled scraps of wood into little toys. But William was gone nearly a decade now, and her children had moved away, busy with their own lives. The phone calls had grown shorter over the years, then fewer, until months could pass without a word. She told herself she was used to it, that loneliness was easier if you stopped expecting company, but on nights like this, with the storm pressing against her windows like a living beast, the silence pressed heavy on her heart. Then she heard it. At first, she thought it was only the wind shifting, a strange whistle in the storm. But then it came again, fainter, but unmistakable. A voice, a cry for help. Her heart thudded. She set the blanket aside, stood stiffly, and pulled on her heavy wool coat and boots. Grabbing her lantern, she opened the door, and the storm greeted her like a wall. The wind nearly knocked her back, and snow stung her face like sharp needles, but she pushed forward, clutching the lantern to her chest. She followed the sound, squinting through the blinding whiteness. At last, the faint glow of headlights appeared, dim and buried in snow. As she neared, she saw the SUV skewed against a snowbank, half buried, its engine sputtering before dying altogether. She hurried closer, lifting her lantern high. Inside the car sat a family. The father's hands gripped the wheel, his face drawn with frustration and fear. The mother cradled a baby against her chest, rocking it desperately, while a boy no older than 6 sat in the backseat, his face pale and tear-streaked. Their breath fogged the glass, their movements sluggish from the creeping cold. Martha knocked hard on the window. "Hey there, y'all all right?" The man turned, startled, before fumbling the window down a few inches. A blast of icy air rushed inside, making the children wail louder. "We're stuck," he shouted over the wind. "The car died, we can't get it started. We've been here almost an hour." Martha peered at the shivering children and felt her chest tighten. She knew what an hour more in that car could mean. "Come on now," she called firmly. "You can't stay in there. My place is just up the road. I'll get you warm." The woman hesitated, clutching the baby tighter. Her eyes darted over Martha, this tiny, wrinkled black woman, her gray hair tucked under a knit cap, standing with nothing but a lantern in her hand. Fear flickered in her face. Strangers in storms could mean risk. But then another gust of wind rocked the SUV, and the boy in the backseat whimpered weakly, and she knew they had no choice. The man nodded quickly. "All right, thank you so much." Martha pulled the door open, bracing against the snow. She helped the woman step out, guiding her as she clutched the baby. The boy stumbled in the snow, crying, until Martha bent low, took his small hand in hers, and whispered, "Come on, sugar, we'll be inside soon." They struggled through the storm together, Martha leading with the lantern, cutting a path through drifts that rose to her knees. Each step was a battle, but she knew the way by heart. At last, her little house came into view, a dark shape against the white fury. Relief surged through the family as she ushered them up the steps and inside. Warmth hit them immediately, the fire in the stove glowing like a beacon. Martha hurried them toward it, brushing snow from their coats. Sit, get warm, I'll fetch blankets." The children huddled near the stove, their faces pinking slowly as the heat returned. Martha spread quilts over them, then set a kettle on the stove. She moved quickly, her old bones aching but her spirit steady. She pulled out jars of vegetables and beans from her pantry, tossing them into a pot to make soup. The woman, Claire, she introduced herself between shivers, watched with wide, glistening eyes. "You saved us. I don't even know how to thank you." Martha gave a small smile. "Ain't nothing to thank me for. Folks help each other, that's all. Now, you just hold that baby tight and let me handle supper." The man, Richard, tried to protest, saying he should help, but Martha waved him off. "You're half frozen. Sit with your family. I've been doing this a long time." As the storm howled outside, the little house filled with warmth and light. The children, wrapped in quilts, stopped crying and began giggling softly when Martha hummed an old gospel tune as she stirred the soup. She sat with them later, telling gentle stories about how, as a girl, she'd once gotten lost in a storm just like this, and how her mama had found her by following the sound of her singing. The boy listened with wide eyes, his fear slowly replaced with wonder. By the time the soup was ready, they were no longer strangers. They shared the meal at her small wooden table, steam curling from their bowls. Richard spoke of their long drive from Denver, how they'd taken the back road trying to reach his parents' cabin before the storm closed in. Claire spoke of her worries for the children, and Martha shared bits of her life, how her William used to chop wood in storms like these, how she still planted a small garden each spring despite her aching knees. That night, the children curled up on Martha's bed, bundled in blankets. Claire sat nearby, humming softly to the baby, while Richard helped Martha stoke the fire. When he turned to her, his voice thick with emotion, he said, "We'd have frozen to death out there. You saved us. I don't know how we'll ever repay you." Martha only shook her head, folding another quilt. "No repayment needed. Sometimes the Lord sends folks to our door for a reason. Tonight, he sent y'all to mine." And though the storm raged through the night, inside that small wooden house was warmth, safety, and a growing bond none of them would forget. By morning, the storm had passed, leaving a world remade. Snow lay piled high, glittering under a pale sun. The SUV was still buried, roads impassable, but for the moment, there was no panic, only gratitude. The family stayed with Martha for 3 days, until the plows finally cleared the roads. In that time, they shared more than just meals. Richard chopped firewood for her, stacking it neatly by the stove. Claire helped sweep and wash, filling the little house with a sense of bustle Martha hadn't known in years. The children laughed and played, turning scraps of yarn into pretend lasso ropes, begging Martha for stories each night. She hadn't realized how lonely she had been until then. The sound of laughter in her home made her eyes sting. She caught herself watching the children with a tenderness she thought had long faded, and when they clung to her skirts calling her, "Grandma Martha," her heart swelled with an ache both sweet and sharp. When the roads opened, the family packed to leave. Claire held Martha's hands tightly. "You've given us more than shelter. You've given us hope. Please, please let us stay in touch. You're family to us now." Martha's voice trembled as she whispered, "Family," a word she hadn't spoken aloud in years. They hugged her fiercely before driving away, and though she waved until they vanished down the road, the house felt emptier than ever once the silence returned. Weeks passed, life returned to routine, but Martha carried the memory of those days like a lantern in her chest, warming her through the coldest hours. She told herself it was enough to have helped them, that perhaps she'd never see them again. But one morning, a knock came at her door. She opened it to find Richard and Claire standing there, their children bounding excitedly up her steps. Behind them, a moving truck idled. "Martha," Richard said, his eyes wet, "we couldn't stop thinking about you. We realized something, no one as kind as you should ever be alone. We're moving here. If you'll have us, we'd like you to be part of our family." The words broke her. Tears spilled down her cheeks as the children threw their arms around her waist. She held them tight, her heart swelling with joy so fierce it made her tremble. The storm had brought strangers to her door, but it had also brought her something she thought she'd lost forever, a family. The snow had buried the world, but it had uncovered love in its purest form. And for Martha Johnson, that kindness changed her life forever.